Let me go ahead. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Oh dear, Amy, your friend from Runway, looks like we lost her,
She's
but maybe we'll get her back
she's
on.
coming here to give me moral support, so she might be back. It's okay. Don't worry.
Okay.
No worries.
Um, Let me go ahead and introduce Amy Dudzinski Mehr from the class of 98, when she was a math major. Those of you who were around when she was on campus would remember her being behind a camera because she was very active in the yearbook, and took lots and lots of wonderful pictures. Um, she also has a certificate in executive education from Simmons University. And ever since graduation from Wells, Amy has been very busy in the STEM world. She has been putting her skills to work in the area of healthcare, creating software packages in companies that make these kinds of products for healthcare facilities and medical research. And she does more things with numbers than I can figure out. And someday we'll be bringing her back to talk about STEM, especially women in STEM, because she knows a lot about what it's like to be the only woman in the room. But I asked her to come to talk about more of another part of her life. I've known Amy since 2009 when Pam Sheridan suggested she'd be a good member of my committee when I was the vice president for nominations on the WCA board. And right away, I knew that I was going to be able to rely on Amy because my grandfather always told me are when you need something done, you ask a busy person. And Amy certainly was a very busy person. She was at the time working on the head of the Charles Regatta, um, as the race director, where she's been responsible for as many as 2,500 volunteers at a time. So, like I said, ask a busy person. Um, in 2014, Amy had something happen that has changed her perspective on the healthcare industry in which she worked. Um, she got to participate in it in a whole brand new way, and she'll talk some more about that. Some of you may have been around on campus at a fall weekend in 2015 when Amy won the Young Alum Award. She missed her acceptance because she was busy rowing at the head of the Charles and chasing those 2,500 volunteers. I'm going to let her talk to us about her journey in a whole new way of looking at healthcare, and especially about a project that she's involved with right now called Runway for Recovery. So, Amy, take it.
Will do. All right, let me share my desktop. Um, all right, can you see slides?
Yes.
Okay, you don't see my speaker notes, correct?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to come. I've been seeing these things on Facebook, and I don't think I've ever made a single one of them, but I've always had the best intent. But really appreciate Fran and Rand reaching out to me to talk to you tonight. And it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces, even though obviously I know there's no more Wells campus. Obviously, Wells still lives on with me, and so I love coming to events like this where we can still come back together as well as once was. But as Fran said, I'm excited to share what I've been up to since Wells, as well as some of my work, as well as some of the philanthropy work that I've been involved with. But to get started, last Thursday, I got a call from my friend Brandon. He's one of my family's really closest friends. Brandon's 42 years old. He has 4 beautiful children, and he has a great career in biotechnology. He let us know that he had just been diagnosed with an advanced form of lymphoma. And now he's fighting for his life at the Mass General Hospital in Boston. And I think everyone here knows someone like Brandon, who's been affected by cancer. Cancer is real, it affects everybody, but it's really through the power of clinical research and the work that I've done and honestly been committed to for the last 25 years of my career, really have played a huge part, I feel like, in helping patients like Brandon. And early in my career, I thought that the work that I did was just work. It was a job, it was a paycheck. I remember those early years after Wells. But now that I think about the work that I do in my career, it's not just work. I've learned that it actually has a very real impact on people. Hold on, I need to get. So in terms of what I'll cover tonight, I'm going to go through, for those that don't know me as well, I'm going to talk a little bit about life right after Wells, just to set the stage of what I started to do in my career. I'm then going to spend a little bit of time talking about clinical trials. And so that's really what I've dedicated my career to for the last 25 years. I never imagined being a young math major, leaving Wells, that I would ever end up doing what I'm doing today. I still tell my story in that I went to a very small women's college in Aurora, New York. And a lot of people just can't believe that I've managed to get where I am in my career. And I couldn't be happier that Lisa's here. Because even though I don't see Lisa every day. Lisa is someone that is in my network map for work. She's someone that I learned very well what a leader is, as someone who was very young, and hadn't started my career. And so I couldn't be more happy to see Lisa here tonight. I'm going to spend a little bit of time after talking about clinical trials, talking about how my personal health situation really changed my career. And then I'm going to talk about at the end how I've been able to learn to be a dancer in recent years. So life after Wells. Transitioning from Aurora, here's who I am. Like Brandon, I've been personally affected by cancer. But really what I've learned through this experience is that I'm very passionate about the early detection of disease. And it's something that, even as young as I was back at Wells, it's something that I was exposed to my senior year at Wells, with my grandfather passing away from melanoma. And I have very fond memories of him because he would sit in his car, his light blue car, right outside Glen Park in his parking spot. There was that one parking spot along the handrail. And he was always there every Friday afternoon when I got out of class. And so then we would drive from Aurora back to Syracuse on Fridays. And those are some of my best memories going down Route 90 with my grandfather. But as Fran said, I graduated from Wells. I had I was a math major with a biology minor, and essentially moved into the world of clinical trials. And when I'm not focused on clinical trials, I'm spending time with my very busy teenager, Benjamin, who's 13, my son, Zachary, who's 7, and I live just west of Boston, right near Pam. I then, as Fran said, continued some education, not for a degree, but a lot of my executive education I've had the opportunity to do here in Boston. And I've chosen to do all of it at Simmons primarily because it is still an all women's environment for me to do my learning. And I firmly believe that as a woman, especially whether it be on a board that I'm on or being part of executive teams where I've been the only woman or one of 2 women in a group of maybe 10 to 12 people, I still firmly believe, at least for myself, and everyone has their own way of learning, that I learn best in an all women's environment because that's just what I learned very young. And so it's where I go to, as I like to say, get my oxygen to refuel my tank to keep on moving. And then, as Fran said, I've done a lot of philanthropy work. I got involved with rowing, as you can see from this picture, actually right after I left Wells. I moved to Boston. I didn't know anybody. And it was through my very first job at a startup company that I actually got asked to go out to row one afternoon. I had never rowed before. And it's been through rowing that I've made a lot of friends, but I've also had the opportunity to get involved and volunteer with the head of the Charles and a number of other organizations in Boston. So for many of you who don't know me, I'm a planner. I like predictability. I like to maintain a lot of balance in my life, and like bricks that are stacked together, one right over the other in rows. I thought leaving Wells, I had figured everything out. But what I very quickly learned was that my plan wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And kind of like a puzzle, I was faced with a lot of things that I needed to figure out. 2 weeks after I left Wells, my parents weren't thrilled about this. My mom may eventually join the Zoom, but they were not super thrilled that I was going to pack my bags and move to Boston. I was the only person in my whole family. I grew up on a street where my whole family lived on the street. And I was the first person to pack my bags and move to the big city. I think, my mom was most relieved that I ended up only in a 4.5 hour car ride away. What you didn't need to jump on a plane. But I came, I had to start to pay my own bills. There were just a lot of things that I had to figure out, and it was very, very overwhelming. I owe a lot of my credit and really being able to get through those early days, really to honestly who I still call today, and they know this, my Wells parents. And that was Carol and Sandy Shalepsky. And they're people that are in my network today. We keep in touch on social. Carol was my advisor. She provided oversight for my thesis, which I went on to in my senior year get the Koch Prize, which basically Wells allowed me to set up a whole computer lab and build a database system for starting up a veterinary hospital because I thought I wanted to go to vet school at Cornell. Sandy taught me most of my math classes, and both of them really, really were instrumental to me. What I would say is that in coming to Wells, I thought I was going to be pre-vet, thought I was going on to Cornell, but it was due to some allergies I figured out junior year that I needed to make another plan. And I remember sitting down trying to figure out what to do. And it was Carol who, in her spare time, also had done some consulting, as she always used to speak about in Ithaca. And she used to tell stories about consulting. She would talk about what she did in the consulting. And this consulting thing at first seemed very ambiguous to me as a young college student. But essentially, I took advantage of some of her guidance through her advisement, and that led to doing a number of my Wells internships. One was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is obviously now PwC, and then I went on to do some other internships. But I decided after leaving Wells that I was going to go into consulting. I had this math and computer science background. I was young, and I was really fortunate to not only get a job offer from PricewaterhouseCoopers and also Anderson Consulting, who were two of the big consulting companies, but I also ended up getting a job offer from a 30-person startup company in Watertown, Massachusetts. And as for those that do know me, I'm a risk taker. So I did not go with the large consulting company that probably would have paid me more and gave me more frivolous benefits. I went with the 30-person startup because I thought that it was the best thing to do. And what I learned is that it would not just be a 30-person startup, but when I started, I would be one of 3 women at that company. So what I would say is that I started to put in place right away from day one a lot of the things that I learned as part of my Wells education, because I was very much dealing with men in the workplace immediately after graduation. I went on in my first consulting project to go to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Remember that plane landing, corn being on both sides of the runway and wondering like what I had possibly gotten myself into. And it basically turned out to be a 6-month project with 15 men and myself building a time entry system for the Department of Defense. And let me tell you, it was probably some of the toughest time of my life, because I was young, I didn't know anybody. I was like, consultants get the term road warrior. I flew back and forth to Boston every weekend. And it was that pile of puzzle pieces that I just had not expected after graduation. If you fast forward and you look at the rest of my career, and I won't go into every job, essentially what I decided to do is after I worked at that startup company, what I did and realized later was managing my network, is that I actually ended up following one of those 3 women to another startup company called Phase Forward. And this was in 2003. And it was after the time that I had decided that I was tired of doing programming and writing code. She took a chance on me because I was a hard worker, and I went into the field of project management. And it ended up being at a startup company that had not IPO'd. And it was all in the clinical trial space. So that company ended up acquiring several other companies. And I quickly rose over my first 5 years there from an individual contributor to a manager to a senior manager, senior director, senior director. I climbed very quickly and helped with those acquisitions. And in 2010, Oracle Corporation, which was well over 100,000 people at the time, acquired us in 2010. And at that point in time, I was leading about a 100-person team, which just about tripled overnight once became integrated with Oracle. Around this time, I was expecting my second child. And I had been at Oracle for well over 10 years, if you counted the time that I had been at Phase Forward. So it was a very stable, comfortable job. But I got a cold call one day. And it was from an executive at a software company called Viva Systems that was public. They had gotten my name through their network and wanted to bring me on as one of the founders of a new piece of software that they were going to build. And so I took on my first executive level role in 2016. When I joined Viva, I was working remotely here from Boston, but they were based outside of San Francisco, again in the clinical trial space. And that opportunity not only gave me the opportunity to build up a 250-person team, but I also helped actually define and build software from scratch to, again, support clinical research. So again, in the same space that I was working in. And then most recently, last April, I moved into what I would say has been wouldn't say it's my final place I'd like to get to, but I joined a health tech startup called Evanova that spun out of AstraZeneca, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. They spun out a health tech startup to essentially continue to support clinical research. And it basically be a science-focused software company. So unlike a lot of software companies that are out to just sell software, very much we're building software that's very much science-based through our research to, again, continue to support the clinical trial space. And so I am essentially now co-running this company as chief operating officer. And so essentially we have about 1,200 employees globally that came to be from the exit from AstraZeneca. And we're anticipating over the next 2 to 3 years to probably triple in size. And so it's going to be pretty fast growth. But as I said, and as my boss has said, she's grooming me. She said since day one, she's grooming me to be her successor. So I'm hopeful to continue to work hard, and we'll see where that goes. So obviously, how did I end up in clinical trials? Again, I still sit here, and as I was putting these slides together, I'm like, how did I go from Aurora to being in this big city, Boston, working at this part of this big pharmaceutical company? I'd like to say it was by mistake, but I really think it was through a lot of luck. And honestly, what I didn't realize when I made that call to that woman who I'd worked for at that first company, that really I was using my network, which I didn't realize. Again, I was still young. But essentially it was through keeping up with her and maintaining that relationship that was really my launching point into the clinical trial space. And really, if I think back to, you can't like predict everything that happens in your life, but really for me, this has been the perfect fit because I wanted to be pre-vet because I loved science. And so the reason that this job has been such a perfect fit is that it's basically allowed me to use, as Fran said in the intro, all my STEM skills. So, it's technical. I can't say I sit and do calculus every day because I do not, and I don't remember how to do any. However, I was doing polynomials the other night with my son, so at least it's coming back a little bit. But all that being said, I feel like it's a good combination of the use of my technical skills, plus I do spend a lot of time I'm meeting with customers and pharmaceutical companies. And so the science has been able to come in very nicely into what I'm able to do every day. Most of my career, I've worked on interventional clinical trials. And so, these are the studies, the biggest, obviously, thing we can remember most recently is obviously COVID. Everyone was part of it. All those clinical trials that we all depended on to get all those vaccines, those were all interventional studies. that were being run to ensure that what they were testing was safe and that they obviously could give it to all of us. And I would say a lot of the work that I've done has been in the oncology space, just given the nature of obviously what's been going on in the healthcare system. I would say overall, it's been honestly through the need of, we all live now taking, whether you're taking Tylenol for a headache or you're taking something for cholesterol or high blood pressure or something else, the world is just dependent on drugs and medicines to live and to cure disease, treat disease, lengthen life. We continue to, obviously invest in this because it's just something that mankind needs and depends on. So it's also been a very, I would say, stable environment to have a career because of the fact that it's obviously something that we need. I think the most impressive thing that I read recently in an article, and this struck me in thinking about actually this presentation because it just about took me back to when I left Wells, is, this is the number of clinical trials that are now running today. There's been unprecedented growth between 1999 and 2024. I would say the magnitude of this growth has essentially been contributed by advances in medicine, drug discovery. There's obviously all this global research in making sure that obviously, we can ensure that, clinical trials are provided to people in an equitable way. We're making sure that we're conducting them in emerging markets and different demographics, as well as obviously with AI. Everything with big data, artificial intelligence, we all have these electronic medical records now every time we go to the doctor. All of these things going on is just continued to make this whole ecosystem that much more complex, as well as all the regulatory changes that we're keeping up with around the world. And so that has really supported, companies like Evanova and what I'm doing today to really see explosive growth. We need to continue to, and this is the part that I enjoy the most, is just be here for along the ride to continue to try to advance science and technology to ensure that, I can help all of you, your families, people that you know. And it's crazy now to think about the fact that, as I do, participate in clinical trials from home or right from my phone. It wasn't like that in 1998 when we left Wells. It wasn't like that in 2003 when I joined that very first phase forward at that clinical trials company. They were rolling in tractor trailer loads of paper to the FDA to submit things for review and approval. Now it's all done with a button click, potentially from a mobile device. So there's just been tremendous change in that space. And then also there's all the work around the world with all the various emerging markets. In particular, the biggest area of growth I think we're seeing, and then I'm actually personally going to have to learn a lot more about, is China. Since China itself is basically, if you think ahead and you look ahead to the next 3 to 5 years, where most of the clinical sites are going to be and running studies are in China. And so as a company, there's a lot of complexities with China, not only from a government perspective, but data security perspective, privacy, cyber, you name it. It's very complicated, but it's something that we're going to need to enter into in order to be able to continue to be competitive. So, what happened next? What really changed my life, and obviously had the biggest impact on my career. And as I bring up my screen, hopefully well here, the phrase that I'll always remember is that 80% of the time, this is nothing. So hold on for a second. I knew I would row again. And I told myself that the next race that I rowed would be this year, and that I would row it as hard as I possibly could.
Ami Mehr is back on the river again, training for this month's Head of the Charles. She knew she'd be here, even when her doctors weren't so sure.
I wasn't going to let breast cancer or anything get in my way.
Amy's diagnosis last spring, ductal carcinoma in situ, a type of breast cancer that starts in the milk duct but hasn't yet spread to other tissues.
She caught it very early. I mean, we call this stage 0. At some point, if she did nothing for it, it probably would have become invasive. We don't know when.
Amy is just 37 years old, too young for regular mammograms, but her doctor ordered one last year when Amy complained about a pain in her armpit. That turned out to be a pulled muscle. This past spring, she returned for a follow-up mammogram.
My doctor calls and says, you have breast cancer. And I'm like, I eat a really healthy diet, I work out 7 days a week, and I have breast cancer.
Amy also has no family history.
Now, I'm fortunate in that mine was caught extremely early. I had options for how I wanted to deal with it. Those options were going to allow me to get back to my life.
She chose a double mastectomy at Mass General Hospital that allowed her to keep her nipples and skin and replace the breast tissue with implants, all in one surgery. Recovery time, 8 to 12 weeks.
So of course in my mind, I was thinking about October. I wanted to row in the head of the Charles. It's the 50th anniversary. Like, that was my goal for this year.
But all summer, Amy couldn't work out. She couldn't pick up her 2-year-old son. And yet Amy says having that goal kept her on course.
I knew that, similar to a crew race, my muscles were going to start to hurt, my body was going to get fatigued.
Today, Amy's back in a boat.
She healed very nicely. She had the type of implant that allowed her to move on quickly.
And now Amy can see herself where she always knew she'd be, at the head of the Charles.
I don't know quite how I'm going to feel, but as soon as I get in the boat and strap my feet in, I'm going off to row the race. I'm going to finish it and know that, I'm moving on with my life.
I'm Kelly Tuthill, WCVB News Center 5.
The head of the Charles is next weekend, and Amy's team.
Doctor calls and says, you have breast cancer. And I'm like, I eat a really healthy diet.
Bear with me here for a second. You guys see my screen again? Awesome. All right. So 80% of the time, this is nothing. And so obviously, as you saw from that video, it didn't actually turn out for me that way. As you saw, and as happened later, that race that I just mentioned is that despite the fact that I only got back in the boat a couple weeks earlier, and as Fran said at the start, rowing's been very important to me. It was the 50th anniversary of the head of the Charles, and so I essentially set the goal to get back in the boat and row the race. And despite the fact that it was an extremely emotional day, this entire crew team came around me, and essentially, I managed to, get back to my life. And so, I decided following this experience that, my way of coping was to really help other people. And so all that work that I had done up until this point with the clinical trials, I had run oncology trials, I had run breast cancer trials, but I was always reading about them in the context of helping other people. But when it gets turned around and it's you obviously on the table as the patient and they're asking you to do a consent, it completely changes things. I not only enrolled in one, actually about 4 different clinical trials, 2 of which I'm still in right now, both of which are actually young women with breast cancer studies because of the fact that I was diagnosed under 40, actually at the time with no family history. But what went on to take place after I did work with the American Cancer Society, I spoke at events, I was recognized at a Patriots game in my story. I ended up finding out 6 months later that my mom actually would be diagnosed with breast cancer. And so after genetic testing, we did not have any genetics tied to breast cancer. So the reason I got it and my mom got it, we'll never have an answer. The best we know is what the story is so that my sister and other family members obviously can continue to be screened. And, my mom's a survivor just like I am and has benefited really from all of the relationships that they had. I remember the call from her and I said, get yourself in the car. I said, I'll get you into Mass General in the morning. And I texted my doctor who you saw in that video and she was in her office the next morning at 8:30. So, that's what I've learned. And I can't tell you the number of people now that actually have seen the same doctor going through the same situation. I'm now obviously in my late 40s. And obviously more people my age are now having their mammogram. And so I'm going through that more and more often. But that's really been my way of coping. But the story doesn't end there. So let me just reshare my screen.
Extreme adversity, and she's advocating for others. Take a look.
Even on a rainy, windy morning, rowing coach Pat Guida readies this double scull.
We suffer a lot. We do a lot of training for a very small amount of race time, so we tend to find a lot of resiliency in the sport.
Jen Devlin, who Pat coaches, says resilient is the perfect way to describe her rowing partner.
She's such a hard worker, so willing to kind of go above and beyond to make the boat go well. And in all things, really. I mean, obviously.
It is obvious once you know Ami Mehr's story. It's one we first brought to you in 2014 when Ami returned to rowing after a battle with breast cancer. The mother of two was just 37 at the time.
You get that diagnosis and you immediately feel like your life is over. And that was the year of the 50th head of the Charles Regatta. It was really important to me to race.
And so she did just 5 months after her diagnosis. Fast forward 5 years, something else felt off. Ami noticed being off balance. She was having trouble with easy math. She had an MRI.
What it ended up being actually was a meningioma tumor, which actually was fused to my brainstem. It was basically tangled up with my cranial nerves, which control all kinds of things in your head.
A 20-hour surgery followed. One false move could have proven fatal. She had to relearn to talk and walk.
When she had the first surgery, she wanted to get back in the boat right away, and I was just concerned, is it okay with your doctors? Are you going to do it? And she's like, I need to do this. So we just did it.
Athletes work really hard, we get up really early, our muscles hurt, and we persevere through things. And so I actually have gone through these difficult health situations trying to use that rowing mindset.
Sharing that mental toughness, helping others through the complex process of navigating health challenges has become Ami's mission.
You're the warrior preparing for battle. You're going into battle by doing your research so that you have a good outcome. I did the same thing with my brain tumor. I've had a very successful outcome, and that's the same advice that I give anybody else that comes to me and says, Ami, this is what I just found out, what do I do?
Ami and Jen are competing in the head of the Charles Regatta. Ami is also this year's race director. Good luck to the rest of the field matching her grit.
She just keeps coming back for more.
She is totally an inspiration. She just doesn't give up. She comes back every time, and it's awesome.
Ami races both Saturday and Sunday between 8:40 and 9. Rowing coach Pat Guida readies this.
She's such a hard worker, so willing.
All right, let me go back. All right, slides again, hopefully. Awesome. So it wasn't over after the breast cancer, unfortunately. Before I get on to the dancing part of the story, I'm fine now. But most certainly what I'll say from this is that I've continued to obviously help everyone through breast cancer, which I'd say I hear a lot more about than brain tumors. But what I would say is the key learning from that is that, and I'm putting this actually in my book, there's a whole chapter about it, is that you really need to be the CEO of your own health. I very much believe that the reason that I had everything taken care of as fast as I did the second time around is because I honestly wasn't screwing around the second time around. Obviously, I didn't have any connections to doctors in Boston who dealt with brain tumors because I knew everyone that dealt with breast cancer. However, I leveraged my network not only through the rowing community, but through work professionally and my breast cancer doctors. And I managed to get in and had my tumor removed within 2 weeks of actually finding it. So we moved very, very quickly. But I can't say enough. And my big takeaway from this would be, don't get down on the story because I am fine. I'm perfectly fine. It's not completely gone. I will watch it for the rest of my life, but I have a 5% chance of ever having to have anything done again, which as far as I'm concerned is perfectly fine for me. And I know exactly where to go if obviously I have a problem here in Boston. But I think the biggest thing is that if something feels off, or if something just doesn't feel right, the best thing you can do is say something about it, because of the fact that, I was rowing and I felt a little off balance and I felt like I had brain fog. And, I remember my husband saying, are you just tired? But when it goes on for a few more days and weeks, it wasn't just being tired, it was because something was pushing in my head. So I would say definitely think about, if you feel something off or you hear something from someone else, I would say just encourage them to get checked out. It's never a bad thing to go to the doctor and hear everything is fine. But the sooner you can obviously catch things, the better. And it's really given me a much different perspective on my career. My current job is the toughest job I've had of my entire career. I most certainly have never done this job before. My boss is tough as nails. She's from Spain. She is not American. She has her ways of working, which I'm learning very well. But the reason that putting in the time and putting in the hours and rolling up my sleeves and figuring out things that haven't been figured out before is to just help other patients like myself who depend on our technology to get the treatments and things that they need to obviously move on with their life. So obviously, I spend a lot of time working. I've got my family. I stay very busy with my boys' sports. But I've been able to do a lot of work, philanthropy work. I'm involved in a number of different organizations professionally through work in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. But it was actually through, honestly, you never know where you're going to meet someone, but it was through a mom of another boy in my son's kindergarten class who met me and said, hey, she's like, I saw your story on the news. And she said, I think there's an organization that you need to get involved with. And so it's been through, it was through that experience and through that relationship that I got introduced to Runway for Recovery, which is an organization here in Boston that actually supports families who are impacted by a breast cancer diagnosis. Specifically families who may have lost children who may have lost a parent, and also in particular with women or men who are dealing with a stage 4 diagnosis, since technically really there's no cure for a stage 4 breast cancer diagnosis. And so Runway essentially provides family grants for families who are impacted. They could be previvors, people in treatment, people out of treatment. And it was through a woman who lost her mom at the age of 13 who decided that she wanted to do something. And so she started a fashion show in Boston. The first fashion show basically had just a few attendees at a very small room at a hotel. And now she's doing these fashion shows and raising money to support the family grant program for Runway. And so she gives women the opportunity to model. So this is just a picture of me from modeling from the last event with Erica Tarantel from Channel 5 here in Boston, who did that news story. And she gives women the opportunity to be outfitted by designers in Boston. You get your hair and makeup done. You're spending a whole day with all these other men and women affected by this, as well as families who may have lost a loved one. We put on music. We strut our stuff down the runway. And it's through the funds that are raised from people attending the event, as well as the fundraising that they do at the event that actually supports the family grant program. And so in 2024, it was my 10-year anniversary for my breast cancer diagnosis. And so I set the goal to raise $10,000. I modeled in the Boston show, which was in October. I'm actually flying out to LA a week from Friday to model in the show in Southern California. And actually, the Southern California show, given all of obviously the horrible wildfires in California, we opened up the family grant program early. And so we were actually funding families who not only lost their house, but who actually are dealing with a metastatic stage 4 diagnosis or have just lost a loved one due to breast cancer. And so we're already actually funding families this year much sooner in California, just given the circumstances. And it's been amazing, the outpouring of support. And then we are having our inaugural show in New York City at the end of February. So I will be in that show actually with my mom, who will be coming down with a bunch of girlfriends from Syracuse. My mom is not modeled in the show with me. However, I'm really excited to hold hands with my mom and walk down the runway together, as well as we have a number of different celebrities. Hoda, who obviously just finished the Today Show, women from Peloton. There's a whole host of different folks that are going to be part of this inaugural show. And so it's going to be a really wonderful opportunity to continue to support the cause. So with that, I bring you to the end of my story. And I know we've got about 10 minutes left for questions, but I really just want to thank Fran and Rand for inviting me. I never turned down an opportunity to be around Wells women. Wells will always hold a special place in my heart. It doesn't matter to me what happens. I do care about what happens to the campus, but for me, Wells is the relationships and the experience that I carry with me. And like I said, given what's come to be in my career, and I could do a whole separate talk on working with men and all of the difficulties I've gone through in my career. Really, I believe that it was really my Wells education that really prepared me. It was developing leaders for the 21st century, I think was the tagline back in 1998. And honestly, I credit a lot of my success to all of what I learned at Wells. So thank you, everyone.
Thunderous applause for Amy. Yay. Amy, give us the dates for your California and New York shows. Who knows? There may be somebody who sees this who will show up for
I
you.
knew you were going to ask me that, Fran. So the California show is on Saturday, January 25th.
Coming up soon.
Which is coming up soon. And the New York show is on Thursday, February 27th. So also coming up very soon. So yes, and it's a little nerve-wracking to go into a new big city to put on a show, but as a board, we had a community, honestly, a few women who came forward from New York and said, hey, we're willing to be your organizing committee. And so you obviously have to have the right people to put these things on with the right connections. It's just been amazing. All the designers and I think I'm wearing Veronica Beard. Like it's going to be a dazzling night. So it's going to be really exciting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Right. And you don't have to attend in order to make a donation to Runway for
You do
Recovery.
not need to
right?
attend. They live stream the event, so it's actually live streamed on Runway for Recovery's website, and it's also recorded. But yes, you can attend in person. You can watch virtually. You can support. So there's a variety of different ways to get involved, as well as the other way, honestly, that's not even financial, is that if you know a family or you know someone who fits into the realm of family impacted with financial needs, or someone who's going through a stage 4 diagnosis, we're always looking for families to fund. And so also more than happy to make sure that I provide the right level of support for anyone who might need it.
Amy, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
We've had some friends who have been involved in the intervention type clinical trials, family members even. Would you maybe speak a little bit on any advice or thoughts you might have for folks who have the opportunity or to participate in such a trial, and what might be good ideas, bad ideas? You're speaking from a standpoint that's a unique perspective on that we don't usually get as patients. So welcome your thoughts.
It's a very good question. So, what I would say is at the end of the day, would I participate in a clinical trial? And the answer is 100% yes. But I think at the end of the day, and I say this is the same thing I say when I share my story, and someone says, well, what happened to you? I always say, well, this is my story and what I decided to do, but obviously we all have our own story. And so what might be right for me may not be right for someone else. And I'm not going to think anything less of, I'm not going to think any less of someone else who makes a different decision than myself. What I'll say is that the only reason that any of us got a COVID vaccine is because people were willing to give someone their arm to test whether it was Moderna, Pfizer, Novavax, all the different like flu shot that we get, it's being tested. Medical device pacemaker, it's being tested. Cholesterol drugs, it's being tested because of the fact that we have regulations, not only in the US, but obviously it's in all over the world in different countries. The only way that those organizations get the data to actually decide whether or not they're going to approve these things to help people. So, we have cures for some things and we have treatments for other things, and we have treatments to just give people more time with their loved ones. You have to have people to participate in clinical trials to be able to do that. What I'll say is the element of risk varies, Rand, depending upon the phase of the clinical trial that you might be participating in. So as one example, my parents have a close family friend, was actually in New York City at 9/11, now has a very, very, very rare form of lymphoma, and was patient number 1 in a phase 1 clinical trial. That's a trial that there is absolutely no human data on, but in that type of situation, he has no other options. And so he's going through that, obviously, with the hope that he's going to get some more time. And so far, so good. Fingers and toes crossed. Phase 1 trials obviously have a much smaller number of people, and generally, it's a smaller population, and you're testing to see if something is safe. By the time you get to a larger trial, you're starting to look at other data, efficacy data, and I would say the risks are a bit lower. However, there's never not any risk because for anyone that has participated in one, you signed what's called an informed consent, which essentially means you're consenting your life away for whatever it is that possibly could happen. There's never any guarantees with science, unfortunately. But what I would say is that the only way we have data, they run clinical trials. We're running animal health studies for dogs and cats and horses and pigs and you name it. They all get medication too, and they also have to be in clinical trials. So, clinical trials are, the way in which honestly we've been able to continue to essentially provide society with what it now depends on to live. And so I would say, assuming that they're clear of the risks and they go through all that RAND with their doctor, they obviously have to make the best decision for them, but 100%, that is the only way we have a lot of what we have today with modern medicine is through clinical research.
And it's amazing how things can move forward, and to what was experimental in a clinical trial soon becomes the standard of care. When Amy and I are sisters in diagnosis. And when I was having my surgery, they asked me if I would donate my tumor to a clinical trial to undergo a process called tomosynthesis. Totally experimental at the time. It is now the standard of care in your mammogram. When you're getting those 3D mammograms, that's what you're getting.
Mhm.
Amy, I'm curious. First of all, it's great to see you. And as always, you've been an inspiration. I think I met you when you were a prospective student. And so all of that energy is continuing, and the impact that you're having on so many lives and communities. But I appreciated you were talking about your work with a variety of companies and the focus, and maybe in your choices of those companies, to have equity at the center of developing trials and access to trials. Is there anything more you could say about that? Because it's about the trials, but it's actually about driving equitable health outcomes. So it's that sort of throughput from the trials through. And we certainly
You're
know that
correct.
for women, it's a problem, but
Yes.
for other identities or intersectionality of identities, so many barriers. What's
It's-
happening in the field that is interesting or hopeful?
I appreciate you bringing that up. So if I think back to 2003, you know, at that point in time, it was, we're collecting data on paper, let's just get it into a computer that can then provide this data to us more quickly. Clinical trials all have what's referred to as a clinical protocol, or essentially it's like you're writing an experiment for like, what are the steps that you're going to go through? What is the data that you're going to collect? And if you look at how protocols are written, or were written, I should say, back in the early 2000s and how they're written now, there is so much more in terms of, like, for example, like African American women in breast cancer. You know, obviously now we're doing genetic testing and we know a lot about different populations or people potentially with different heritage that might be more susceptible to certain diseases. All of that now is actually being taken into account when they're doing clinical trial designs, and actually to ensure that, you know, they're not only qualifying people into studies, for example, based upon, you know, you're male or you're female, and usually it's like you're within an age range, you're, you know, of certain health. Now they're actually going in and asking a lot more questions, actually get to get into, Lisa, what you were talking about, because they're trying to actually collect data to basically be able to ensure that the testing is being done across multiple different populations. Because what they found through looking at a lot of historical data is that, you know, studies, if you were to just look at some early studies, it's like, you know, a whole study of like white Caucasian men versus, you know, having, you know, all sorts of other, you know, heritages in a particular trial. So they're trying to, and actually it's been through the FDA and actually through a lot of the regulations, is that these organizations now are actually needing to be responsible for running studies in a more equitable way. I know AstraZeneca, for example, is actually working on a huge initiative with all the other big pharmaceutical companies, between not only for making clinical research more equitable for people, they're also trying to do this in a sustainable way to obviously also take care of the planet. Like, these companies are now coming together and being much smarter about what they're doing. But at the end of the day, you know, we want more data to be able to provide evidence that for particular disease, for particular populations, that, you know, it actually works and can be effective. And so now they can be much more precise actually when they're prescribing something, because they've actually collected the data in recent times for things that have been submitted, that if you think back 25 years ago, they didn't have the information. But the good news is that the regulators are keeping tabs on the pharma and biotech companies and actually forcing them to do it. It was something maybe 5 to 10 years ago people were kind of doing as something to test and to see what happened, but now they're actually being required to do it.
And Amy, your work is creating all kinds of new opportunities for lots of other people, because I'm thinking about here in our part of North Carolina, not only do we have two huge research hospitals and the big companies in the Research Triangle Park, but our local community college now has a associate degree program in clinical trials management.
Yep. Boston University actually has I keep saying I'm gonna go, but then someone said to me, they're like, you'd be bored because you've already been doing this for 25 years. But they actually have degree programs now where you can go and actually like go into the field of like clinical research. We've actually done, AstraZeneca's done some partnerships. I haven't yet actually gone to speak, but a lot of the local universities, like through those programs now, like those are really our feeder programs for like college development programs. Like, we have a program we're actually just launching at Evanova, where you know, what I found, and actually I learned this at Viva, is that, you know, we're going to start bringing in cohorts of students right out of school who have focused their education in these particular areas and bring them up through the organization. What we found actually when I was at Viva and we did that is that, you know, some of the actually senior executives now, because I was at Viva now a bit ago, some of those folks are actually people that started at that company through the college development program and who were kind of brought up in the culture of the company, and now they're like helping run the company. So I'm hopeful to bring them in because they're young and eager and they know all the latest the latest skills and things that I don't know. Like for example, right now I'm trying to find someone to do Power BI reporting for me, which is not something I learned at Wells. But it's just another way to find folks. And yeah, I mean the degree programs now that are going on, it's just amazing all the different permutations of things.
Well, if you ever get bored or just want to slow down a little, y'all come on down to Durham and we'll see about getting you in there.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming. It was wonderful to see everyone. Pam, we're making a date to go to the coffee shop. And Cynthia Kep, it was great to see you too. So, and I think my mom also heard this. Oh, Russo's on too. So, hey, Michelle.
Hey, oh, hi, Lisa.
Hi, Michelle.
Always happy to be here to support a fellow Wells sister and just see the people and be a part of Wells. And Amy, your story has been inspirational. I've loved you for 25 years as my sister, my family member, and very, very proud of you.
You're stuck with me, Michelle. So
good. You're stuck with me too.
Did anybody have any other questions or comments quick?
I just wanted to ask if we can do, I started a tradition when I was teaching online for 18 months, little ones, which was quite a challenge. And we always ended our class because everyone was so isolated during the pandemic and they're on their laptops and their iPads. And so I one day just said, hey guys, lean in and put your arms around your computer and send everybody a hug. So I wonder if before we go, can we do a Wells hug?
We'll do that.
Yeah.
And while we're hugging, let me announce our February 12th Learning by the Lake presentation. I understand that February 11th is the finale of the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show. So on the 12th, tune in because my classmate Holly Mitchell Cook from the Rochester area will tell you about her life raising champion competitive boxers and her work in the dog show business in the Rochester area. So she'll bring lots of cute puppy pictures and we'll all get a chance to go to the dogs.